Connecting. Okay. Looks like YouTube's good. Looks like LinkedIn is good. And all right. Hey, we already have people in the comments. Ruthie and Rita, hey, thank you for tuning in and welcome everybody to this June 2026 FinCrime Friday chat. It is great to be here. It's a rainy day here in Indiana where I am. And I'm in a different location today. So we may have some technical issues on today's stream. So if we have any freezing or anything, please just bear with us. It's just kind of the situation we've got today, but we are excited to be here to discuss the World Cup of scams for today's FinCrime Friday chat. We're so happy to have all of you here tuning in, and we are going to jump right into it. As usual, my name is Clayton Norman. I am the social media and marketing manager for Serify, which is the parent company of ACFCS. I have our incredible ACFCS team here. We've got Aaron. Aaron, can you say hi?
Hello.
And we've got Brian, our VP of product and programming.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here with you.
And as usual, first of all, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love seeing all of those roll in from all across the globe. And it just really helps us feel connected to this incredible community that we have going here of FinCrime Warriors. Also, a couple of other things that we want to mention before we jump right into it. First of all, if you have not become an ACFCS member, today is a great day and actually maybe one of the best times of the year to do that because we are actually currently running a discount or a promotion celebrating 250 years of the United States of America. So you can take, Brian, correct me, help me make sure I get this right. We're doing 25% off all training programs. Is that correct?
That is correct. 25% off all training programs and 250 off all certification packages, including standard rate for self-study, government rate for self-study, and accelerator program CFCS enrollment too.
Okay. And the codes that you need for those are US 250. Is that right, Brian?
USA 250 for the certification to take the 250 off the certification, and USA 25 for 25% off all training programs, including the digital asset compliance specialization and our human trafficking course too.
Okay, so make sure we're going to put those codes in to the comments in a little bit. So those codes will be there. Again, this is a great time to become a member and or purchase some training options. And of course, your membership gets you access to incredible exclusive events, members only webinars, hundreds of hours of training. It is an incredible investment. One of the best investments probably that you can make for your financial crime and compliance career. And right now is absolutely the best time of the year to go ahead and do that. So make sure you guys check it out. We also have some incredible events coming up. We'll circle back on those at the end of the discussion, but FinCrime Virtual Week is coming up in August. You can find all of our events and upcoming webinars, trainings, workshops at acfcs.org. Head on over to the website. We will also be dropping links into the comments here after the broadcast to let everybody know where they can find all of those things. And great to see you, Jay. Love having you here. You're a regular, so appreciate you tuning in from rainy Canada. Also rainy here in Indiana, like I said. And hey, Oliver, great to see you from the DR. Yeah, really appreciate you showing up. Let us know where you are tuning in from. And of course, Wasim.
Pakistan.
From Pakistan. Love this. It is incredible to see this like global community of people coming together for these conversations. So really appreciate you guys being here. And we will go ahead and jump into the World Cup of scams. So this month, it's going to be just a little bit different. We're going to be talking about 3 of the most infamous financial crimes in modern history. These cases span Ponzi schemes, crypto fraud, global corruption, and each one offers valuable lessons for today's financial crime professionals. We're going to discuss these all-time greats of financial crime. We're also going to explore not just what happened, but what compliance pros like you can learn from these cases and how similar red flags continue to appear in investigations today. So as we're going through this conversation, we would love to hear your questions, your comments, your insights. These are all going to be cases that you will be familiar with. You have heard of these, you've seen the headlines, and would love to hear your thinking or your thoughts or how you would approach some of the red flags that we're going to discuss in these. And again, keep those roll calls coming in. We've got India, we've got Pakistan, Dora, hi Dora, from tuning in from Berlin. These are incredible. Grishan, and let's see, Galena, Illinois. Good to have you here, Tom. So guys, keep those coming and share your questions and comments as we get into the scams. So for our first World Cup of Scams participant or scam, let me see if I can add this here now. Bernie Madoff, inside history's biggest financial crime. So World Cup contender number one, Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. Often considered the most famous investment fraud in history, Bernie Madoff operated a massive Ponzi scheme for decades through his investment advisory business. Here's how the fraud worked. Rather than generating legitimate investment returns, Madoff used money from new investors to pay existing investors while fabricating account statements showing consistent profits. The scheme relied heavily on reputation, exclusivity, and trust among wealthy individuals, charities, and institutions. When the scheme collapsed in 2008 during the financial crisis, investigators estimated approximately $64.8 billion in reported account balances and roughly $17.5 billion in principal losses. In 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 150 years in prison. The Madoff Victim Fund and trustee recoveries have since returned billions of dollars to victims. However, I think that those are probably only a small percentage of the losses. So, all right, this one could be, this one could be our World Cup of Scams champion. I don't know. We're going to talk about it. Who wants to jump in first? Brian, Aaron, who's going on this one?
I'd like to throw my hat in the ring for this one.
Let's hear it.
All right. So, well, the whole Bernie Madoff thing was crazy for me because back in 2008, when the news broke, I was still in the government and I had no idea who this person was at all. And reading more about it over the years and learning about the case itself. And speaking of that case, if anyone wants to be a speaker for my State Your Case podcast, still looking for folks. We have a form. If you're interested, hit me up at what is my email address? ealocklin@acfcs.org. I'd love to see what you have to bring to the table to talk about your State Your Case. So we're talking about cases, so that reminded me. This one, I started throwing myself into it, looking at it, reading it, because I didn't understand anything about the financial system, institution, nothing about it. And it actually, it's weird because Madoff, as we all know, he weaponized trust. He was a trusted, known entity on Wall Street, and his trust actually became it was actually in place of the due diligence that I later learned needed to have happened. And that was a weird thing with me reading this one, because back in my background investigator days, I read the very first, and this might be controversial, don't mean it to be, but it just reminded me of it. I read the very first intake interview of O.J. Simpson after when his wife and Ron Goldman were killed. And a lot of the police officers were very starstruck. And there were a lot of holes left in that very first interview because they were very excited to meet him. They kept praising him and they kept going, oh, and we kept saying things like trust. And that word kept coming up a lot. Going, oh, I trust that you were this and they were that. And that was very odd to me to have seen that, I think to anyone. And then you fast forward to 2008. And then after that, I started hearing that word again, trust. And the word trust, he weaponized it clearly because his investments, his returns were all steady and consistent. Well, the market is never steady and consistent. If it was, it wouldn't be quite the world market now, would it? And that's what actually trumped the compliance part of it. It was his reputation. And it reminds me that all compliance professionals, you know what, you can't take prestige over evidence. And so you have to actually really look at the facts and the evidence to make a good outcome or decision if you're going to SAR, if you're going to close or whatnot. And sometimes that decision of looking past the reputation and looking past and into the evidence You could be the lone voice on the compliance side of the house, which a lot of us times we are, and we're going, something's wrong here. This doesn't feel right. And you're told, sit down, be quiet. Compliance just means no. Why are you at this table? You're not a revenue producer. You don't understand what money means. You're a cost center. And it can be really tough on you when it comes to that. But stand strong. And the Madoff case actually really, really goes to that.
That the trust weaponization piece is so fascinating to me, right? Trust, but verify. And as a reporter, back when I was pounding the streets as a reporter, that one of my mentors used to say, "Hey, if your mom tells you she loves you, believe her. But check it out too."
But check it out.
And I think that's a key thing for anyone in any of these roles, and certainly on the investor side too. I mean, if something smells too good to be true, it warrants a little bit more looking. Brian, any thoughts on Bernie?
When I was a journalist at the tail end of the Madoff scandal, so I missed the main event of it, but I was writing for publications around the time of the sentencing and some of the follow-up asset recovery, and at that time it was deeply challenging not to use puns on Madoff in every single headline or lead sentence of the story. So I found the Madoff case really challenging for that reason. No, it's a fascinating case. I mean, it points out not all scams share the same elements, right? But when you get into these higher level investment scams like Madoff pulled off, one of the fascinating things is how it kind of highlights this very old adage: you can't con an honest John, which means it's harder to con. You can con an honest John. Honest Johns get conned all the time, as we say, but it's harder to con someone that's not looking to make a quick buck themselves, right? It's much easier to con someone if they themselves buy into the greed element of it, which all of us are vulnerable to. It's not unique to any person. But Madoff really played upon that greed element. People did not want to miss out on the fact that they could make a lot of money. And in fact, some of his largest investors made out like bandits on Madoff. While we talk about it as a Ponzi scheme, which sounds like everybody lost money, that's not the case. I think one guy, the main beneficiary of it, made something like $7 billion on it that he is still paying back to people that lost money on the scheme. So it is a interesting, when we get into the sophisticated, quote unquote sophisticated, because at its core, it was a pretty straightforward Ponzi scheme. But when we get into the higher level investment frauds, it's interesting to see the importance of greed in how these play out. And that might be a theme that we see in these other cases too. But also, I think what Madoff really highlighted was the exposure to well-connected networks, which will also be a theme in the other two cases we look at. And the presumption of, maybe not the presumption of innocence, but certainly the presumption of ease of access and legitimacy among these high-level, well-connected networks. And when I say high-level, well-connected networks, I mean both high net worth individuals and politically connected folks, because Madoff had both. And so will all of the other characters that we meet in our World Cup of scams. But, I know there is baked into the compliance world a risk assessment of high net worth individuals and PEPs as generally higher risk. However, in practice, it seems like maybe we don't have that risk ratcheted up high enough, because in a lot of cases, these are the individuals that are, in fact, very much key players in facilitating financial crime schemes. And facilitating is a broad term that can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't mean they're always doing it directly, but they are key actors in it, sometimes unwittingly. So, I think maybe you'll leave this discussion with a more jaundiced eye on the ultra high net worth and politically connected world as we walk through some of these scams. But yeah, that's what I'd say on Madoff.
Yeah, I think you're very keyed in onto the common themes there, and something else that I kind of was thinking about related to this case is that the deference to power and deference to connected or wealthy individuals, but also an element of shame, which is something else that we've talked about when it comes to scams, and especially like romance scams. There's probably people who were victims of Madoff who realized probably earlier on than others that something fishy was going on, and maybe didn't want to cop to it or speak up because of the shame or embarrassment that they may have felt, and not wanting to be, like Aaron said, that lone voice speaking up. So would love to hear from our audience how you guys view that sort of intersection of trust, fame and power, shame, and how those things come into play in cases like this. And actually, Kathy already weighed in and said, referencing trust, it replaced skepticism. And I think that's exactly right. And people were thrilled when the return, which was a ton of greed we were thrilled with the returns, which was, due to greed on the investor's part. And like Brian said, all of us could be susceptible to that. When things are good, why throw sand in the gears, right? If the returns are coming in. So, okay. So still loving seeing everybody chiming in from where they're tuning in. Hey, Stephanie from Idaho, great to have you. Okay, so strong contender for the World Cup of Scams right there. Number one, Bernie Madoff. Moving on to our second World Cup contender, number two, the 1MDB, or Malaysia Sovereign Wealth Fund scandal. So the 1MDB scandal is widely regarded as one of the largest global money laundering and corruption cases ever uncovered. Just like Brian was just mentioning, we're talking about people who are well connected politically and financially. Billions of dollars were allegedly diverted from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund through shell companies, offshore accounts, and complex international transactions. Funds were used to purchase luxury real estate, artwork, yachts, and even to help finance the Hollywood film, The Wolf of Wall Street, which is an insane bit of irony there. U.S. authorities alleged that more than $4.5 billion was misappropriated from 1MDB. As a resolution, multiple prosecutions and settlements have occurred worldwide. Goldman Sachs agreed to pay billions in penalties, and Malaysian financier Joe Low remains one of the most notorious fugitives associated with the case. So, Brian, you want to start off on this one with the 1MDB scam?
Yeah, 1MDB is great. It's like 100 CFCS exam questions rolled into one. Right. You just have every possible typology of money laundering and financial crime and corruption on display. Yeah, I mean, 1MDB is a stunning case of political corruption combined with collapse of the controls in major financial institutions that should have prevented it, combined with stunning opportunism. It's like I said, it's got a little bit of everything. The failures are kind of a cascade of governance across the board, starting with the 1MDB investment vehicle itself. This was supposed to be a public-private development fund in Malaysia that was going to kick in government money to supplement private money in order to do infrastructure projects, right? And they had a board of advisors that were supposed to authorize it, except the chairman of the board of advisors happened to be the prime minister, who ultimately, with his associates, carried out the corruption scheme. So that was the first failure. From there, you have a series of failures involving the shady associates of the prime minister, moving the funds into financial institutions, both within Malaysia and then ultimately around the world. And Goldman Sachs was a key facilitator of it. There was, I believe he was the director of the Southeast Asian division, who ultimately was involved in this and resigned. It was a whole major scandal. It points out again some of the same themes that we saw in the Madoff case, right? We have political connections, high net worth individuals. There's this whole element of public corruption that wasn't really present in Madoff, or at least wasn't as directly relevant in the Madoff scheme. That plays out here. And then you have the interesting angles in the 1MDB case that point out the potential regulatory gaps that allow some of these financial flows to occur, right? Like a lot of this money moved into, not all of it, some of it just stayed in bank accounts and broker dealers and the usual places, but a lot of this money moved into real estate. Real estate was definitely a vehicle for layering and integration of the funds taken from the 1MDB fund. Art, obviously, some very high net worth art pieces were used as a integration vehicle, and even areas like investment in films, right? Like you mentioned, The Wolf of Wall Street, famously, like life imitating art, imitating life. There, so the use of these areas that are still, and a lot of it, interestingly, when we think of the United States, it often occupies this very schizophrenic, I would say, place in the financial crime landscape, because it is the nation with the toughest enforcement, the biggest penalties, the most robust law enforcement apparatus around financial crime in a lot of ways. It's also the nation where all this dirty money ends up. And that's partly because we have these huge gaps in this country, like real estate, certain investment funds, the private investment world, the hedge fund space, that are under or entirely unregulated when it comes to financial crime. So, you wouldn't necessarily expect 1MDB funds to be flowing into the US, but a lot of them did, which ultimately allowed US authorities to more easily build cases, seize assets, etc. But there was a reason why they came here. And part of the reason is because of these regulatory gaps that the case really highlights.
All right, fascinating stuff. Aaron, any thoughts on the Malaysian sovereign, this scam? Sorry.
Yes, I'm with you.
Whatever this is.
Yeah. It's Friday, it's a live show. It's all good. Yeah, just a couple of them. Just that basically that this case itself shows a lot of times, most of the time, quite frankly, that money laundering isn't just a one person or one transaction type of event. It's definitely a bigger network. And just because you have, government exposure or PEP exposure, it doesn't mean that it goes away because, that person's a trusted PEP. No, it should not reduce scrutiny at all. And I believe, I could be wrong about this one, and it may have hopefully helped to heighten it a little bit more. So I know a lot of things happened when I was working the FI space around that.
While
that
Aaron
time.
is taking a little break, thanks for bearing with us. We had some great comments.
What happened?
There we go. She's back.
I'm here. I didn't go away.
Okay. Well, you had frozen for just a little bit, it seemed like.
Oh.
I think you're all right. You're all right, Aaron. So you're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's about it. It's a network, and to make sure that we have political exposure scrutinized, not necessarily reduced.
Okay. And the fact that J-Lo not J-Lo, Joe Low. J-Lo may be a fugitive too, but I don't know about it. He's still on the run. He is still being searched for by authorities, which I don't know how you could be that high profile of a fugitive and not have been picked up, but I guess it's there's a lot of nooks and crannies for people to hide in. So we're going to go on to our World Cup contender number 3. We've got some really great comments that I'm going to share once we get through that one, because I think they speak to all 3 of these scams, and that can kind of lead into our discussion a little bit. So contender number 3, I don't know if anybody wants to take a guess in the comments before I start getting into this one, but be curious to know if you guys could guess what number 3 World Cup contender for the World Cup of scams might be. I don't think anybody will be surprised when I start going for it. Okay. Well, contender number 3 is FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with this. FTX transformed one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges into one of the most spectacular corporate collapses in financial history. Prosecutors alleged that customer deposits were secretly diverted to affiliated trading firm Alameda Research, where billions were used for speculative trading, investments, political donations, and other expenditures. Customers believed their assets were safely held by the exchange. At the time of its collapse in November of 2022, billions of dollars in customer assets were missing, affecting millions of customers globally. On multiple fraud and conspiracy charges in 2023, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Recovery efforts for creditors continue. So, big one, big one here. There you can see the man himself. He is behind bars as we speak, and has also lost his most recent appeal. That was actually just earlier this month. So it sounds like he is going to be staying behind bars for the immediate future. Guys, where do we start with this one? Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, FTX should, honestly, this is just my opinion. This is not the official opinion or view of ACFCS in any way, shape, or form. But honestly, I feel that FTX should be kind of a blueprint for the future of crypto exchanges and any companies that want to build around crypto and the blockchain technology itself, because it says compliance is absolutely core and at the center of what you should be looking at. You should have folks who say, oh, wait a minute, let's talk about a conflict of interest. Let's talk about compliance regulations. There was at least, now I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, let me know in the chat. Let me know, hey, Aaron, you're absolutely wrong. It's changed this way. I lived in the Silicon Valley area. I worked in the Silicon Valley area. I know a lot of folks and experienced a lot of different meetings where the tech side of the house, very smart people, incredibly smart people, just a lot smarter than I am. Of course, that's not saying much, but a lot smarter than I am, sitting at the table telling me about how the technology works. And I was drinking it in and learning and then saying, well, what about the regulation? And that's where the door slams. And there's a big rift between those of us, again, like I said, you stand up in your sole voice to say, this doesn't seem right. You're also the sole voice when it comes to tech. There is a big need and urge and feeling that everything has to get done quicker, sooner, go to market a lot faster, and be the cutting edge and the next big thing, maybe the next big Facebook, maybe the next big Google. And there's a big, huge urge and push for that. And I believe FTX is a big example of that, because the money that customers thought was okay, was safely held. It was actually going into Alameda Research. And I believe his girlfriend he owned part of Alameda Research, and he brought her on as a chief operating officer. And the whole thing was just a mix of complications. And it shows that, technology does move fast. And I'm a big proponent of moving fast, because I lived over there and I saw what great things can happen when you have technology that moves fast. You have people that can get better access to food and water, better access to banking, better access to supplies. Supply chain can move easier. I am a big proponent of it, but I'm also a proponent of let's do it the right way as quickly as we can. And that was clearly not even looked at here. And in fact, I would guess, given what my experience I had in the Silicon Valley region area and the meetings that I was in, and only based on that, I wonder if all of the tech folks said, oh, no, we're not listening to them. Forget it. They don't know. They hold us back. And I hope that that's changed. If it's changed, I'd love to know. Let's promote that. Let's show that there's growth in this environment, in this industry, because I really feel like there's a lot of room for growth and relationship between compliance, between legal and the tech that needs to happen. And I did hear, I'll end with this one comment. I was at a event in Malibu a couple of years ago when I first joined ACFCS, and there's a regulator that's sitting up on the stage, and he was just fascinating to listen to, because a lot of folks were coming kind of at him. He was the sole regulator on the panel. A lot of folks are coming at him, and I learned a lot from him, because he said, we don't want to put what you can and can't do in the future ahead of you. We want to work with you so that we don't stifle technology. And I really liked that explanation. I hope it's the truth. I hope folks, who are in this space know that and see it and can say, yes, that's the truth, or maybe not. Maybe you feel that you're being stifled by the government and regulation. I hope not. But FTX was a big, huge blueprint and, guys, you should look here. Don't do what they did, sort of thing.
I think that's a brilliant analysis. Brian, what are your thoughts on FTX?
Yeah. I mean, I think FTX is definitely the perils of, trying to move fast and break things on one side.
No, he's up.
Okay, here he is.
Yeah. Am I here? I think I'm here. Okay. I think to Aaron's point, FTX is definitely a risk of, trying to move fast and break things, but I also think that in other ways it is an old school bank fraud, I guess you could say. And there was a quote by the acting head of the OCC. I don't think he's still the acting head of the OCC at this point, Michael Sue. At the time, or shortly after FTX collapsed, that referenced an older and perhaps still resonant case for some of us out there, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, where the OCC acting head said there are strong parallels between FTX and the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which failed in 1991 and led to significant changes in how global banks are supervised, end quote. And I think that's true. I think BCCI, if anybody remembers, the sometimes tongue-in-cheek referred to as the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International, this private bank that grew very quickly through acquisitions and creative accounting practices and regulatory arbitrage. They set it up intentionally so that it had operations in 70 plus different countries. This is BCCI. And that was done so that no one regulator or body could gain insight into the bank, its customer base, its operations, and really stop it per se. It just constantly was acquiring new customers. It was doing very bad basic accounting practices. And it connected the dots in the banking space between safety, soundness, good banking practices, governance on a fundamental level, and financial crime. Because at the same time as BCCI was doing all this dodgy accounting stuff, it was also providing accounts for like Saddam Hussein and drug traffickers and Colombian cartels and all this kind of stuff, right? So if you're sloppy on the fundamentals of governance for the financial sector, you're going to end up sloppy on your financial crime practices generally. And that's also what was happening at FTX. It was both a fundamental governance failure and a financial crime failure. And FTX, I think, has been a motivating force in some of the legislation and legislative and regulatory push we see around the crypto sector nowadays, right? So to the extent that, it parallels BCCI and some of the reforms we saw in the wake of the collapse in 1991, I think, really is kind of what is partially at least leading to some of the motivation in the US behind, okay, let's regulate and sort of clean up this space to some extent. So yeah, interesting case, and one that I think will continue to resonate in the industry going forward.
All right. So great analysis from both of you guys. Our 3 World Cup of Scams contenders. Folks in the comments, as we get closer to the end, we're going to have some discussion, but would love to hear from you which one of these you believe is the champion, reigning World Cup of Scams champion. Let us know which one you're thinking. Also, and I apologize, I lost a couple of the comments when my connection dipped out for a second, but we had some really great comments that said, I don't understand why some of the accounting folks or others specific to, I think John was talking about the Madoff scam. Like, why didn't, these are all high net worth people who are involved in this. Definitely they have CPAs, accountants, tax pros working for them. Where were these people when that scam was going on? Like, why did not some of those people raise the alarms? Or maybe they did and were just ignored by the guys who were loving the returns, right?
Yeah, I personally believe that there were people who did say, this is weird, this is wrong. I don't know them for a fact. I can't say that for absolute 100% fact, but absolutely, I'm sure some people did raise alarms. Maybe even people quit their jobs that they were contracted with. There's also the other side of the house where I used to work in financial institutions. There were folks there, mostly the wealth managers, who fought hard against closing accounts, especially the high net worth ones. So there's a lot of pressure there to keep them. So what if they did, and then they were told to shut up? So I don't know. I think some did, but I don't have evidence that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Madoff case in particular, there was years of whistleblowers
Yeah.
and parties, from finance. So I mean, Madoff at one point, his scheme kind of started as more of what you could like think of as classic affinity fraud, right? He approached a bunch of high net worth people, particularly in his community in New York, and he's very active in like a lot of community groups. He's leveraged those connections. Um, but as it grew more successful, he actually went and approached like major financial institutions. And some of them questioned him, and he wasn't really able to provide satisfactory answers as to his trading strategy. And they were very suspicious. They're like, we're not going to, they refused to invest. There was financial analysts who contacted the SEC along the way saying it was mathematically impossible for Madoff to achieve these returns. So there were numerous cases of people trying to blow the whistle and get people's attention on it. It definitely wasn't a case in which everybody just sort of shrugged their shoulders. I think Madoff, it's important to remember who he was. He's known as a fraudster now, but he was a major market maker on the New York securities exchanges. He was at one point the chairman, I believe, and definitely on the board of governors of the National Association of Securities Dealers, which is the precursor to FINRA, for those that are familiar with FINRA. So he was one of like the people that was in charge of regulating the securities industry, right? He was very much in a securities industry insider, and he leveraged that position of insider trust to carry out the scheme and keep any sort of regulatory pressure and scrutiny off him. Because how could it'd be like, how could this guy who's an insider at FINRA be doing a massive Ponzi scheme, right? So it goes back to one of the things that we talk about, like on the CFCS and et cetera, is like vetting insiders and conducting a fraud risk assessment that includes the risk of executive level fraud, senior level fraud, board level fraud, right? It's not often something that like we want to think about or do think about, but in FTX and Madoff and 1MDB, when you look at the role of Goldman Sachs, it was the most well-connected insiders at the highest level that perpetrated the fraud schemes. So it is a very real and very substantive fraud risk that I do feel like is not often accounted for enough. But yeah, I mean, to go back to like how Madoff carried it out, he carried it out because he was that type of highly well-connected, powerful insider. It wasn't that nobody said anything. It was that people said anything, and he just had the juice to be able to keep going, like despite all of the skepticism and the investigations and the whistleblowing.
All right. Great stuff, Brian and Jay. You're absolutely right. Elizabeth Holmes, close runner-up, definitely could have been on this list. If we had time to do more of a bracket, I'm sure she probably would have been in there too. And Jay also, Jay's vote was for FTX. So would love to hear what other folks think and what vote you're going to cast. But here's the thing: we've got these three different cases. On the surface, they look very different. Fabricated investment returns versus international corruption and money laundering networks, and move fast and break things, crypto, fintech, moving fast, intersecting with greed. But they all shared several common themes. So trusted institutions and individuals were key to the fraud, just like in Madoff's case and in Malaysia. There were warning signs long before the schemes collapsed. Complexity helped obscure the truth in all of these scams. And victims included both sophisticated institutions and ordinary people. And then compliance, governance, and oversight failures allowed all of these things to continue. So for this audience, for our financial crime professionals, these cases are a reminder that technology changes, markets evolve, criminals adapt, but the core warning signs stay remarkably consistent across all of these things. So thinking about these things and thinking about these three cases, which one of these do you two, Aaron and Brian, which ones do you guys think have had the longest or the largest long-term impact on financial crime and compliance today, and why?
I kind of have almost a trick answer, sort of, to you, almost like not knowing what. I'd say one MDB, because the long term impact they had on financial institutions worldwide about anti money laundering, corruption, PEPs, the global networking. That's for traditional, as TradFi, right? Traditional financial institutions. And I'm going to switch it up on you a little bit. Madoff completely reshaped the thinking around investment fraud. And that one got a huge spotlight. So the three that you picked were actually all spot on. And then FTX reshaped thinking about crypto and really put the brakes on. And I almost could hear in my mind a cartoon little Fred Flintstone with his feet on the ground going, with the smoke behind him and stuff, with all the crypto bros going, whoops, maybe we should look at this a little bit. So I think all three of them are number one for reshaping different aspects of our industry. The three major industries: it's securities, our TradFi, our traditional financial institutions, and then of course crypto, which is the big prong in our fork there.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate way of not answering.
Yeah.
For sure. Brian,
Yeah.
what's your take on that one?
I wanted to be a little cynical and say none of them, but because it feels like we learn the same lessons over and over again. But I mean, I think long term FTX will probably have the biggest impact, but not necessarily for the reasons directly related to the case. FTX helped to precipitate what was called like the crypto winter in 2022. And also, I think shook a lot of less compliant, less well governed, less well capitalized, and dodgier crypto and digital asset businesses out of the industry as a result. Like that was not necessarily a direct reaction to FTX, but in the wake of the scandal, the bad press, the regulatory scrutiny, I think what has emerged on the other side about 3 years later is a better regulated, better, more compliant, more above board digital asset space as a whole. And as digital assets, particularly stable coins, continue to evolve in the future as a key part of the financial system, I think this case is like one of the building blocks that led to a better run digital asset space. So I would say probably long term, I don't even think we've necessarily seen it yet, but I think long term FTX is going to be one of the foundational cases when we think of financial crime and reform.
Okay. And anybody who wants to get ahead of that curve needs to check out the DAX course.
Ooh, nice one.
Got to plug that if you want to be at the forefront of digital assets and compliance. That is the course for you. You can find it over. It's under our training tab, I believe.
I'll put it up. I'll put it up here.
All right, and Aaron's going to drop a link there. So, all right, Brian, I think that's also a very legit analysis of this. So across these three cases, what are the red flags that investigators today, kind of using these as in context, should be able to identify quickly and easily? And whoever wants to jump in on that one first, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I would say, again, it's not necessarily a red flag, but going back to risk assessment, ensuring that your risk assessment includes the right people in the right places. And, don't be, not that it's always up to you out there on the call, but don't be afraid to have a higher degree of skepticism of parties who may seem otherwise legitimate, right? Is one of the lessons that we should think of from this training. The financially savvy, well-connected, politically connected of the world are not immune to financial crime by any means, and in fact may be parties in financial crime. So to the extent that you are involved in customer due diligence, risk assessment, developing or conducting those aspects of compliance. That is absolutely like a key, a consistent through line that we see in these cases. The other, I think, again, not a red flag, but the other takeaway for financial institutions in general, and again, this is tough because compliance folks are not often privy to the business decisions that lead to some of these outcomes, but to the extent that you have a seat at the table in taking on these customers or being being a part of these decisions, I think the financial institution space should be very comfortable with saying no to something that seems attractive at the time if they can't get the right answers on the compliance side. And digging into those right answers on the compliance side and having the right answers, getting the right answers should outweigh the opportunity cost, right? Like, and in a lot of these decisions, it didn't. They were willing to forego the right answers for the opportunity to bank the 1MDB players or get the accounts for Bernie Madoff, right? And this tension between business and compliance has always been there. But, the right answers can protect your institution from scandal, from reputational risk, and from just facilitating mass scale financial crime.
Yeah. I mean, would FTX be better off if they had not been, if they had continued on that course, or if they got completely destroyed and did this again? So had some really great comments as well. Stephanie, who weighed in saying that she is through the foundations portion of DAX and is loving it. So great to hear that, Stephanie. We would love to see that. And then she also reminded everybody that also can be, you can get the discount if you use the codes that we discussed a little bit earlier. So feel free to use those codes to purchase your DAX and step into the 21st century of financial crime compliance. Got another great comment from John, who says, what about TD Bank and Danske Bank scams, which went on for years? Every Sentinel regulator, governing body, auditors, almost everyone failed. And those two should be contenders. And yes, I mean, we literally could have had a whole round of 32 if we had wanted to, just like in the actual World Cup. We could have broken it all the way down. We just don't have the time to go through all of them. But yeah, John, those are, I think, excellent examples too that would have made, for a really good reading. Okay. So one of the key things is that we were just talking about, every one of these cases was allowed to happen because of those incentives, because institutions failed to identify or stop the scams. So what does that tell us about the limits of traditional compliance programs, and what is the evolution that we should be asking of ourselves and of the industry going forward? And I'll open the floor.
I'll throw my hat in the ring on this one. So when I hear that question, I think of traditionally a lot of what people think is compliance programs are the checkboxes. Click the checkbox here, click that. And that's a huge failure as well. And it's something I think we should get out of thinking. And yes, there's a lot of checkboxing because in the SAR fields for the US anyways, and the FinCEN SAR sections, you have to. I get it. I mean, there's a physical aspect to it, but it's not all about checkboxing. It's judgment driven. And I think a lot of that judgment, the judgment from the folks like Brian, when you brought up the Madoff whistleblowers and things like that, it was not heard. And I've been in meetings where I was trying to say, this is actual money laundering. And here's my justification for shutting these accounts down due to all the policies and the surrounding rules that we have around accounts. And then the pillars of money laundering. And I brought that forward, and the wealth managers would fight and tooth and nail and just say, absolutely not. I've been there. I've seen his actual building. Come again? That's your argument? Okay. So there's also probably lack of training on their end, and that's not their fault, right? but it's definitely the judgment part of it. A lot of compliance folks aren't being heard. And how do we change that? How do we shake hands more with our tech folks who need the technology faster, quicker, better yesterday versus, waiting and making sure it's in line with regulation. And it's not just about collecting documents. It's a lot more than that. It's about identifying the beneficial ownership. It's about actually looking at the reputation. And I think traditional compliance struggles when they deal with powerful clients. That's the thing, because no one wants to hear no, or no one wants to hear wait. That's the problem. And with these powerful clients, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to be told wait in line or give me 4 minutes versus the 30 seconds that you had. And I need to make sure everything's okay. And how do we complete the required process sort of thing? And does this make sense? And how do we actually get past that? I don't know, because powerful people, are they on this call? I think all the powerful people are on this call, by the way, on this LinkedIn, but that's just my opinion. How do we get them to understand and hear that we do need to maybe take 4 minutes instead of 30 seconds? That's a bigger question to ask.
Absolutely agree. Brian, any thoughts on that one?
I feel like we need a rebrand of compliance in general. It's like
right?
It's not even a cool name, right?
It's not.
Yeah, and conceptually, it just makes it sound like you're trying. To Aaron's point, it makes it sound like you're trying to just, do whatever you got to do to follow the law, right? Like, and that's, yes, of course, yes, you follow the law, and everyone follows the law, but following the law is a lot of cases there is the regs implementing these laws have a wide degree of latitude for you to go further or do more, right, than the bare minimum. But B, there's a letter and a spirit of the law, and the spirit of the law is all about preventing financial crime and preventing bad people from doing bad things with money. And compliance doesn't really capture that outcome or that role within the financial sector, so we need a cooler name and we need more authority, I think, to really solve some of these challenges, because it's not doing it in its current form of like, oh yeah, the compliance people tell us XYZ. So anybody got a cooler name out there, let us know.
I know, right? That'll be awesome. Rebrand. Can I also just make one little disclaimer as well? I don't know if it's a disclaimer. It comes before what you say, or what is an after? Anyway, an afterthought. I'm not trying to denigrate or bash any wealth managers. I think they're amazing. There's so much good. In fact, I'm friends with a couple of them, and I'm dealing with one right now in my own capacity who's helping me out tremendously because something happened that was out of my control. And the fraud at my bank, they thought it was fraud, and she was able to say no, and here's the evidence for it. And she was able to go to bat for me, and she's doing it literally right now today. So shout out to those wealth managers who ran banking centers on their own and understand this from the customer side and the compliance side and the fraud and AML side. So there's such a huge need for them. So I just don't want anybody to leave here saying wealth managers are awful, blah 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 blah. They don't listen to me. No. That's not what I'm saying at all. We need everybody in this space, this industry. And there's just a couple of people that I dealt with just in my capacity. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough. I mean, it would be great if more different parts of the industry were more aligned on the incentives about protecting those things, right? And Andres just weighed in with this really great comment that I think speaks to the pain points that a lot of these cases like unearth, right? And that's the reality that until fines actually hurt, compliance is just going to be treated as a cost of doing business. And until the day that the economic penalties really bite, not just on paper, that's when compliance really will get a seat at the table. And I think
love that.
That's actually pretty accurate. And of course, not just economic penalties, but criminal as well, right? Stronger prosecutions would be great to have. And Oliver, of course, always appreciate your insights. Undoubtedly, compliance programs must go beyond a simple checklist or box check program to achieve real effectiveness in accordance with FATF standards. So I think I think we can all agree on that. So we're real close to time here, and I know we've kept everybody. We really appreciate everybody tuning in. Still got a couple minutes if anybody wants to vote one more time on what your number one contender, your World Cup of scams winner would be. I think Brian cast his vote for FTX. I feel like just for notoriety, personally, my vote is going to go for Madoff. But would love to hear what everybody else thinks in the comments. Let us know which one you think is going to be the best. But last kind of discussion question, Brian and Aaron, and this is really just about what are the lessons, right? When we look at these three cases, what should every financial crime professional take away from viewing these as the kind of the trifecta, the ultimate World Cup of scams?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think if I had to pick one takeaway for like the average compliance person, right, who may not have necessarily like a seat at the table where like a lot of these decisions are made, it would still be that your reporting and diligence matter, because these cases were not one thing, right? Like Madoff or 1MDB or FTX was not one sort of, Hollywood moment where the bad guy revealed his scheme and got taken down. It was a steady drip of, concern raising, red flagging, reporting to regulators, reporting to law enforcement over time that built up what ultimately led to these cases being exposed, or after the fact led to investigations, right? And even asset recovery, like asset recovery in all of these cases has been huge. And financial intelligence, in some cases produced by law enforcement, has allowed the DOJ or private sector asset recovery professionals in some cases to go after these assets and actually get them back to victims. So for the many folks out there who can't decide to update their risk assessment on PEPs or change the way that relationship managers interact with their clients, your work, receiving red flags, filing SARs, conducting investigations still adds up to exposure, prosecution, investigation, and asset recovery in these cases. Like it's still contributed to cleaning up after these scams at the very least, if not helping to detect them in the first place. So I would throw that out there as a takeaway for these three cases.
I like that. Aaron, you gonna weigh in?
I think it's a matter of, obviously we talked about, there's that saying, trust but verify. No, trust has gotten us in this problem in the first place. These problems in the first place. And these three cases show that there's too much trust involved in the slick kind of like, trust me, I'm the snake oil salesman. I can give you what you want and cure cancer and everything else. And people who come off too polished and so very polished and everyone trusts them, even from birth, that's just been me. I've never really liked it. I've never really taken to it. I've always appreciated people who just speak off the cuff, who have a little bit of rough around their edges, because I certainly do. I don't say the right things a lot of times. I don't come across polished, and I'm working on it. But to me, that resonates reality and real. So don't be afraid to ask uncomfortable questions. If there is something about the person, what the answers they've given, the sheet that you're looking at, challenge the status quo, challenge the explanation, make sure you've got the evidence on your side to be that sole voice. Because scams don't really come with someone going, "Oh, I'm an obvious villain and I'm twirling my mustache," and so like Disney, I'm wearing white gloves or black gloves, so I'm the villain. And you're not going to see that. And to be able to say, "Hey, I don't quite trust this. It seems all too very well put together and perfect, and everyone loves this entity, everyone loves this group, everyone loves this person," and they're saying, "Hey, don't worry about it. We've already checked, and compliance doesn't need to be brought in on this." I think we've learned that in these three cases alone, and the cases that people have put in here in the chat, that's not getting us anywhere in our world now, is it? So just don't be afraid to ask the uncomfortable questions.
All right. I think that is brilliant. And we've also got some brilliant comments here. let's see. Of course, we had Kathy jump in with the trust but verify. I think Aaron starts with polite skepticism and then moves through verification towards something approximating trust.
Yeah.
Maybe from what that sounds like. I think that's great. Thank you, Kathy. And then Dr. John here, one big crack to fill is the gap between governance and compliance. Not sure how many governing bodies are able to ask the right questions and have effective oversight. So it starts there. Then the compliance side and how sophisticated modern crime is vis-a-vis compliance, and how much resources do they have to take on these cases, and the problems fall in between those cracks. I think that's probably accurate. I appreciate that. And then we've got some couple more votes for FTX. So Brian, I think you're on the leaderboard here. Aaron says, I'd vote for FTX due to the alleged fraud being centered not on whether the business existed, but on how customer assets were handled. I think that's a good insight. Dr. John's cast a vote for FTX. Then we've got a user whose name we can't see, but being on the fraud side of things, I trust no one. I think that's also a good place to start from. And Stephanie says, I trust no one until proven otherwise in my investigations. Skeptical people, vigilant people are what we need. Stephanie, I think that is
on the nose, Stephanie.
That's right. That's where you should. That's the starting place, right? If you're going to be in this field, is being skeptical, being a little suspicious, and then making sure everything checks out. So, guys, thank you so much. We are definitely at time now. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. I think this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed this talk. Also, USA broke my heart last night in the actual World Cup. So hopefully we're going to have a better showing next week when it counts. So I hope everybody is tuning in. And if you have a team that you're watching and cheering for, I hope they do well. I just hope they lose to the US, whether it comes down to it. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Hey, don't forget about that discount. That discount expires, I believe, Brian, am I right that it expires Monday night at midnight?
The 30th, yeah. So I think that's Tuesday, but Tuesday night. So you got till Tuesday the 30th to use that discount and definitely take advantage of it.
So do not miss that. It is a great time to get your membership or any training that you want and save some money. Again, that's $250 off your membership or 25% off any of our training programs. So do not miss that. The codes are also on the website. If you go to acfcs.org, you'll see them right there. We're going to put them in the comments here so that you'll be able to grab them right there as well. In the meantime, August FinCrime Virtual Week is coming up. If you're an ACFCS member, that is 100% free for you. Sign up, save your seat, and come join us. It is going to be a fantastic week. We have incredible speakers. I mean, I was looking at the lineup and the sessions, and it is going to be an incredible time. Please come check that out. It is free if you are a member, and non-members are also able to register. And if you become a member after the fact, you should have access to the recordings in the future as well. So definitely check that out. Also, make sure to check in on acfcs.org/events, and you can see other workshops and webinars and activities that we have coming up. Really appreciate it, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining us on this FinCrime Friday chat. We're going to be back next month, July. I believe the 31st is a Friday. If not, it's the 30th or the 31st. It's like the last or next to last day of July. 31st. Okay, so Friday, July 31st will be our next FinCrime Friday chat. We hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Stay vigilant.